History tells us Rome conquered the world with legions and emperors, but the truth is stranger, sharper, and more enduring. Rome was not built in a day, nor did it fall in one. Behind the marble arches, bloody arenas, and marching armies lay a story of ambition, betrayal, invention, and survival. This was not just an empire, it was an idea that outlived kings, borders, and centuries. Today we will compress nearly 1,000 years of triumph and tragedy into a journey that captures Rome's rise, its glory, and its collapse. Rome's origins are as much legend as they are history, yet within those stories lies the seed of what would become the greatest empire of the ancient world. The tale begins with Romulus and Remus, twin brothers said to be sons of Mars, the god of war. Abandoned as infants and raised by a she-wolf, they grew into fierce young men who sought to build a city of their own. Their vision, however, ended in blood when Romulus struck down Remus in a dispute, claiming sole rule and naming the settlement Rome in 753 BC. For centuries, Romans repeated this myth, not just as a tale of birth, but as a warning. Rome was born from struggle, sacrifice, and conflict. Survival, even from the very beginning, was won by strength and ruthlessness. Yet behind the myth was a harsher truth. Rome started as a cluster of huts along the banks of the Tiber River, surrounded by stronger neighbors, the Etruscans to the north, Latin tribes nearby, and the Sabines in the hills. It was a vulnerable outpost in a violent landscape. Rome's earliest kings, whether legendary or real, were less conquerors than survivors, blending peoples, traditions, and religions into a single community. The Romans became masters at absorbing others. Enemies were not always destroyed, but often made part of Rome. This ability to integrate rather than exclude would become one of Rome's defining strengths. By the 6th century BC, Rome had fallen under Etruscan influence. Kings such as Tarquinius Superbus ruled with wealth and grandeur, but also with arrogance and cruelty. His expulsion in 509 BC became a turning point in history. The Romans, scarred by tyranny, vowed never again to live under the rule of a single king. In its place, they built a republic, a system where power was divided between two annually elected consuls, advised by the Senate and balanced by the voice of citizens. This structure was imperfect, favoring the wealthy elite, but it planted the foundation of shared governance that would hold Rome together for centuries. The early republic was fragile, tested constantly by enemies outside and tensions within. Neighboring tribes saw Rome as weak and ripe for conquest, but Rome fought with an intensity that surprised its rivals. Every defeat was turned into a lesson, every setback into a rallying cry. What set Rome apart was not invincibility, but resilience. Where others broke, Rome rebuilt. Where others surrendered, Rome endured. Over time, the small city on the Tiber carved out alliances, absorbed enemies, and turned its survival into dominance across central Italy. In these early centuries, the character of Rome was forged. Discipline, loyalty to the state, and a relentless drive for survival became the cornerstones of Roman identity. The story of Romulus may be myth, but its message was real. Rome was born in blood, hardened in struggle, and destined to rise. From a village of shepherds and farmers, it laid the foundation of a power that would one day rule the Mediterranean world. The Roman Republic was not content to remain a city among rivals. Once it had secured its footing in central Italy, expansion became its defining trait. The Republic grew not only through brute force, but through clever alliances and calculated diplomacy. Rome offered conquered peoples a choice: resist and face destruction, or join and share in Rome's future. Many chose the latter. This system of extending partial citizenship, granting rights while demanding loyalty, created a web of allies who fought under Roman banners. By uniting Italy in this way, Rome forged a military machine unlike any other, one built not just on its own citizens, but on the strength of its allies. Rome's true test came with the Punic Wars against Carthage, a wealthy maritime power controlling trade across the western Mediterranean. The First War, fought over Sicily in the 3rd century BC, forced Rome to build a navy almost from scratch. They studied captured Carthaginian ships, copied their design, and within years challenged Carthage at sea. Victory in this war gave Rome its first overseas province, setting the stage for more expansion. The Second Punic War brought Rome face-to-face with Hannibal, one of history's greatest military commanders. In 218 BC, Hannibal crossed the Alps with war elephants. shocking Rome and defeating its armies in a string of crushing battles, most famously at Cannae, where tens of thousands of Romans fell in a single day. Many thought Rome would collapse under the weight of such defeat, yet Rome showed its most dangerous weapon was not tactics or technology, but sheer endurance. Refusing to surrender, Rome rebuilt its armies, avoided direct confrontation with Hannibal, and slowly cut off Carthage's resources. Eventually, under the leadership of Scipio Africanus, Rome carried the fight to North Africa, defeating Hannibal at Zama in 202 BC. By the end of the Punic Wars, Rome was no longer a regional power. It was the dominant force of the Western Mediterranean. Spain, Sicily, and much of North Africa now lay under Roman control. But victory brought more than land. It brought immense wealth, slaves, and influence. Rome's armies, hardened by decades of war, became professional forces. Its politicians, enriched by conquest, grew ambitious and hungry for power. Rome did not stop with Carthage. In the east, it turned its eyes to Greece and the remnants of Alexander's empire. By the mid-2nd century BC, Greece too had fallen under Roman rule. The cultural riches of the Hellenistic world flowed into Rome. Philosophy, art, and science mingled with Roman discipline, giving rise to a unique blend of cultures. But along with culture came greed. The Senate swelled with corruption. The gap between rich and poor widened, and unrest simmered in the streets. The Republic had conquered more than it could manage, and though its armies were unmatched, its political unity was cracking. Expansion had given Rome power beyond imagination, but it had also sown the seeds of the Republic's eventual unraveling. By the 1st century BC, the Roman Republic was a victim of its own success. The wealth and power brought by conquest created deep cracks in the political system that once held the state together. Landowners grew richer, absorbing farms into vast estates worked by slaves, while ordinary citizens were pushed into poverty. Grain from conquered provinces undercut local farmers, leaving many homeless and flooding the city of Rome with restless masses. Corruption spread through the Senate, as powerful families fought not for the good of the Republic but for their own wealth and dominance. The ideals of shared governance that had once defined Rome were fading, replaced by ambition and rivalry. This climate gave rise to strongmen who used military power to secure political influence. Generals like Marius and Sulla set dangerous precedents, turning their armies into personal tools. Marius opened the legions to the poor, promising land and wealth, creating soldiers loyal not to Rome itself but to their commander. Sulla marched on Rome with his legions, an unthinkable act in earlier times, and seized control of the state. Each power struggle left the Republic weaker, normalizing civil war as a path to authority. Amid this turmoil rose Julius Caesar. Charismatic, brilliant, and ruthless, Caesar understood both politics and war. His conquest of Gaul from 58 to 50 BC made him the most powerful man in Rome, commanding legions hardened by years of victory. The Senate, fearing his growing influence, ordered him to disband his army. Instead, Caesar made the fateful decision to cross the Rubicon River in 49 BC, an open declaration of defiance. "The die is cast," he declared, and Rome plunged into civil war. Caesar's victories were swift, his rivals defeated, and he emerged as dictator for life. To many, he was a savior who ended chaos and brought reform, redistributing land, reforming debts, and extending citizenship. To others, he was a tyrant who threatened the Republic itself. On the Ides of March 44 BC, senators led by Brutus and Cassius struck him down, believing they were restoring liberty. But instead of saving the Republic, Caesar's death only deepened the crisis. In the aftermath, alliances shifted and new wars erupted. Mark Antony and Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, avenged his killers but soon turned on each other. Their struggle culminated at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, where Octavian triumphed. With Antony and Cleopatra dead, Octavian stood alone as master of Rome. He presented himself not as a king but as first citizen, yet in truth, the Republic was finished. The Senate remained, but its power was hollow. Real authority rested in one man. The fall of the Republic was not a single event, but a slow collapse brought by inequality, ambition, and endless wars. What began as a city of shared rule had become an empire ruled by one. The ideals of the old Republic were buried, replaced by a new system that would shape Rome's destiny for centuries to come. With the rise of Augustus, the Roman world entered a new era. Though he never called himself king, Augustus held absolute power, carefully masked beneath titles like princeps or first citizen. He presented his rule as a restoration of the Republic, but in reality, the Republic was gone. What replaced it was the empire, and Augustus was its architect. He reorganized the government, secured the loyalty of the legions, and introduced reforms that stabilized the economy. For the first time in generations, Rome knew peace, an era later called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, which lasted nearly 200 years. This peace was not passive. Rome expanded its frontiers to their greatest reach. Under Augustus and later emperors like Trajan, the empire stretched from the deserts of North Africa to the forests of Britain, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Euphrates River. Roads tied the vast territories together, aqueducts carried water into bustling cities, and trade flourished across seas once dominated by pirates. For many, Rome was not just a political power but a way of life, marked by law, architecture, and the promise of stability. But the imperial system carried dangers as well. Everything depended on the character of the emperor. A wise ruler could guide the empire with fairness and vision, while a corrupt or unstable one could plunge it into chaos. The reigns of emperors like Caligula and Nero revealed the fragility of the system. Caligula's paranoia and extravagance brought terror to the palace, while Nero's cruelty and neglect sparked rebellion and even the Great Fire of Rome. These rulers showed how quickly the line between stability and disaster could be crossed when power rested in the hands of one man. Yet Rome endured, not only through strong emperors but through the resilience of its institutions, its armies, and its culture. The legions remained the backbone of Roman power, guarding borders and suppressing revolts. Cities from Gaul to Egypt thrived, their streets lined with temples, forums, and amphitheaters, symbols of Roman influence that blended with local traditions. Roman law, carefully codified, spread across provinces and created a common framework that outlived the emperors themselves. The golden age of the empire also brought cultural exchange. Greek philosophy, art, and literature mingled with Roman practicality and engineering. The Colosseum rose as a symbol of both grandeur and brutality, hosting games that entertained the masses while reminding them of Rome's dominance. The Pantheon, with its soaring dome, revealed the ingenuity of Roman builders, a structure so advanced that it still stands nearly 2,000 years later. The age of emperors was a paradox. It brought peace but relied on conquest. It offered stability, but teetered on the will of rulers. It united vast lands but fueled inequality at its heart. Still, it marked the height of Roman achievement. Under the emperors, Rome transformed from a Mediterranean power into a civilization that shaped the world, leaving behind monuments, laws, and ideas that continue to echo through history. By the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire faced challenges greater than any legion or emperor could easily overcome. Its size, once a symbol of power, had become a burden. Stretching across continents, the empire required constant defense, endless resources, and a steady flow of strong leadership. But instead of stability, Rome entered a century of crisis. Emperors rose and fell at a dizzying pace, often murdered by their own soldiers or rivals. In just 50 years, more than 20 emperors ruled, many for only months. Authority became fragile, and the empire fractured under the weight of ambition and betrayal. The borders, once secure, now trembled under pressure. Germanic tribes pushed across the Rhine and Danube, testing Rome's defenses. In the east, the Persians threatened Roman lands, striking deep into its territories. With each invasion came devastation. Towns burned, fields destroyed, and people displaced. At the same time, the empire's economy struggled. Heavy taxation, reliance on slave labor, and devalued currency weakened its foundation. The bustling trade routes that had once enriched Rome were less reliable as wars disrupted stability. Amid this turmoil, some emperors tried to restore order. Diocletian, who came to power in 284 AD, recognized that the empire was too vast for one man to govern. His solution was bold: divide authority. He created the Tetrarchy, splitting rule between 2 senior emperors and 2 juniors, each responsible for different regions. Though the system was complicated, it brought temporary stability, strengthening borders and easing the burden of rule. Another turning point came under Constantine in the early 4th century. He not only reunited the empire after civil wars, but also made a decision that would forever change history. He embraced Christianity. Once persecuted, the faith now became tolerated, and later the empire's official religion. This shift gave the Roman world a new spiritual foundation, one that would outlast its political institutions. Constantine also moved the capital east, founding Constantinople in 330 AD. Strategically located between Europe and Asia, it was richer, more defensible, and better positioned for the empire's future than Old Rome itself. These reforms extended the empire's life, but they could not erase deeper problems. The East, centered around Constantinople, grew wealthier and stronger while the West weakened. Economic decline, political corruption, and reliance on mercenary forces eroded Rome's resilience. Citizens who once saw military service as duty increasingly left it to foreign recruits with little loyalty to Rome itself. The crisis and division of the empire revealed both Rome's adaptability and its fragility. Through bold reforms, leaders like Diocletian and Constantine delayed collapse, reshaping the empire for centuries to come. But the cracks were permanent. The empire was no longer one unified power, but two worlds drifting apart. An East that would survive and transform, and a West that moved closer to its final fall. By the 5th century AD, the Western Roman Empire was staggering toward collapse. Centuries of strain had hollowed out its strength. The once proud legions were no longer the disciplined citizen soldiers who had conquered the Mediterranean, but were increasingly filled with mercenaries, Germanic tribesmen, Goths, and others hired to defend Rome against their own kin. These men fought for pay, not loyalty, and their allegiance shifted as quickly as Rome's treasury ran dry. The empire's economy had weakened under endless wars, heavy taxation, and the loss of fertile lands. Grain shipments from Africa, once the lifeline of Rome's population, were disrupted by invasions. Cities shrank, trade faltered, and the empire that once fed the world now struggled to feed itself. At the same time, the enemies Rome once held at bay pressed harder than ever. The Visigoths, pushed westward by the advance of the Huns, sought refuge inside Roman borders. Poorly treated and exploited by Roman officials, they revolted. In 410 AD, under the leadership of Alaric, the Visigoths marched on Rome itself. For the first time in 800 years, the Eternal City was sacked. The world was stunned. Rome, the heart of empire, had been breached, its treasures looted, its pride shattered. Though the empire survived this blow, the illusion of invincibility was gone forever. In the decades that followed, the West unraveled piece by piece. Vandals crossed from Spain into North Africa, seizing the grain-rich provinces that once sustained Rome. From their new base, they struck at sea, raiding the Mediterranean and even sacking Rome again in 455 AD. Meanwhile, the Huns under Attila swept into Europe, their fierce cavalry devastating cities and kingdoms. Though Attila's death in 453 slowed their advance, the damage was done. Rome's provinces were bleeding away one after another, and the empire's grip grew weaker by the year. Inside Rome, politics had become little more than theater. Emperors were made and unmade by generals, their reigns often lasting only months. Corruption was rampant, resources were squandered, and the Senate that once guided the Republic was now powerless. The empire's fate rested in the hands of men who no longer had the strength to defend it. The final blow came in 476 AD. The Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the boy emperor Romulus Augustus, a ruler whose name bitterly echoed Rome's beginning. No armies rose to defend him. No citizens rallied to restore the throne. The Western Roman Empire, after centuries of glory and struggle, simply ceased to exist. To many, it was the end of an age, the fall of a world that had once seemed eternal. Yet the story of Rome did not vanish. In the East, the Byzantine Empire thrived, carrying Roman law, culture, and identity for nearly another 1,000 years. And even in the West, Rome's shadow remained. Its roads still shaped travel, its laws influenced kingdoms, and its memory inspired generations. The fall of the West was not the end of Rome, but the transformation of its legacy into something new. The Eternal City had fallen, but the Roman idea would live on. Rome's story is one of rise, glory, and fall, but above all, endurance. From a small village on the banks of the Tiber, it grew into a power that ruled continents, shaping law, culture, and faith. Its legions conquered, its engineers built, and its leaders dreamed of eternity. Yet its downfall reminds us that no empire, however mighty, escapes the weight of time. Corruption, division, and overreach hollowed out what armies once built. And still, Rome never truly disappeared. Its language shaped Europe, its laws guide nations, its monuments still stand. To reflect on Rome is to reflect on ourselves, the greatness we can achieve, the flaws that undo us, and the legacies we leave behind. Rome's empire ended, but Rome itself became immortal.